Chilean author Isabel Allende once said, "What I fear most is power with impunity. I fear abuse of power and the power to abuse." It is a quote that a lot of Filipinos may feel some connection with, especially in light of the last 6 years. A lot of allegations of abuse of power under the Duterte administration are made within the context of his war on drugs. However, when one looks closer, the culture of impunity and the tendency to abuse power has spilled over into things that were and are unrelated to any drug issue at all. Still, at the center of it all is the police. For as long as there's been law enforcement, there has been abuse of their power. So as a solution, modern society has made sure to put in laws, checks and balances to reduce such abuse. To rebrand the police's mandate as not just an entity to protect the royals or the elites, it is now there to protect and serve everyone. But alas, even in today's society, the police are still prone to use their guns and badges to serve their own interest. The only thing that has changed in recent times is the presence of social media. Love it or hate it, social media has been instrumental in shining a light on law enforcement's questionable actions that were, in the past, rarely witnessed or caught on camera. These days, everyone is a reporter, and it is this introduction of social media and technology that made us all witness just how quick and easy power can be abused in a situation that could have been easily de-escalated. This is the case of the Sonya and Frank Gregorio double murders. Mabuhay Lagim fam, welcome to episode 2 of our newest season. Before I proceed, could I please ask you for one thing, a tiny favor? Please make sure to rate Lagim on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. On Apple Podcasts, you can also write reviews, so please do so when you have time. Thank you. Apart from that, do not forget to follow Lagim on social media, especially on Instagram and YouTube. Thank you, Lagim fam. I really appreciate it. All the links you need to support me are in the show notes. Now, as always, details in this story may be triggering for some people, so please take care of yourself whilst listening. Today's case leads us to Barangay Cabayaoasan in Paniqui in the northeastern part of Tarlac near Pangasinan and Nueva Ecija. If you're wondering why you think you may have heard of Paniqui Tarlac before, then that's because it is the birthplace of the late and former President Corazon Coanco Aquino. Apart from this claim to fame, Paniqui Tarlac, or rather Barangay Cabayaoasan, is your run-of-the-mill small town. Nothing ever happens there. Well, usually. But all that changed suddenly on the 20th of December 2020, whilst the world was in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. Suddenly, Filipinos got to know this barangay, and not in a positive way. It started with a harrowing, almost 5-minute video. Filipinos woke up on the 21st of December, days before Christmas, to a viral video that showed scenes that should only be seen in works of fiction, if at all. It shows a man shooting another person point blank and doing the same to the other person in the video. This all happened in broad daylight with a small crowd that was gathered nearby who seemed equally upset as the viewers of the video. The video is chaotic and stress-inducing. And as the minutes ticked by after the video went viral, Filipinos learned more and more about the people in the video and what had supposedly happened. The viral video seemed to have started right in the middle of a confrontation that started at around 5 in the evening on the 20th of December 2020. We would later learn that this confrontation started because of the shooting of an improvised air cannon made out of a PVC pipe called boga, a rather loud device. Gregorio seemed to have been the one who started the use of this device in this scenario, which in turn angered his neighbors, the Nuescas, particularly Sergeant Jonel Nuesca, a police officer from Barangay Cabayaoasan, but who was normally stationed elsewhere. He was home for the weekend. Nuesca supposedly ran out of his house after loud noises emanating from the cannon operated by Gregorio seemed to have angered him. But this was not a first-time dispute between the neighbors. The Nuescas and Gregorios had been dealing with a long-running land-related dispute over a right-of-way for some time now, so there was in a way some bad blood between the families. In some other reports, it was said that Nuesca only emerged from his home to confront the Gregorios after his own daughter had been arguing with them a few minutes before the confrontation really started. As the video starts, we see Sonya Gregorio, Frank's elderly mother, with her arms wrapped tightly around him, seemingly stopping him from going anywhere or from being taken away, as Nuesca threatened to have him arrested. This all took place outside of Sonya's home. In the background, we hear female voices pleading with Frank and Nuesca to stop. Nuesca can be seen standing right in front of Sonya and Frank, seemingly holding Frank's arm or arms to stop him from escaping. Gregorio looks drunk in the video, and it was later confirmed that he indeed had something to drink. This commotion went on for over 4 minutes. As the video approaches its 5th minute, one can see a female figure from the left side of the frame join Nuesca and the Gregorios in the middle of the frame. This person would later be identified as Nuesca's 12-year-old daughter, Elisha. She then slaps Sonya's arms and tells her to let go of Frank, to hand him over to Nuesca. She continues to shout at Sonya, telling her to let go of Frank. Sonya retorts and tells the girl to tell her own father to let go of Frank. The young girl then shouts that her father is a policeman. Sonya replies, "I don't care," as if to taunt the girl. In the blink of an eye, Nuesca threatens to kill mother and son, but shouts, "You son of a whore," in Tagalog, presumably towards Frank, only then to ask rhetorically, "Do you want me to finish you off right now?" presumably addressing both Sonya and Frank together. He then pulls out his 9mm pistol, shoots Sonya in the head, shoots Frank in the head, and shoots Sonya again in the head. Pandemonium breaks out. The video then abruptly ends. Alyssa Calosing, who reportedly recorded the video that had gone viral, told DZMM Radio that before the shooting, Nuesca had actually hit either Frank or Sonya Gregorio. When I was watching the video, and I only watched it one time, and I refused to watch it a second time, I did not recall seeing this, so this could have taken place way before anyone started recording the altercation. Calosing also disclosed during this radio interview that after the shooting, Nuesca grabbed his daughter and walked off as if nothing had happened, and honestly, I'm not surprised. Personally, the video took my breath away, and it took at least a week before I could resume writing for this episode because I kept seeing the images in my head. I'm not traumatized by the violence or anything, although it is truly upsetting. But what struck me the most and what remained with me after watching the video is the ease with which Nuesca wielded his power, position, and pistol to snuff out 2 lives just like that. There was no hesitation. There was an almost irreverent determination. The killing may not have been premeditated in the 4 minutes where all we could see and hear were cries and screaming, but in that split moment when he perceived Sonya's defiance and taunting as perhaps offensive, he was ready to put her and Frank in their place, and that place was death. This awful crime was then reported to the police some 20 minutes later, whilst the rest of the Gregorio family was still reeling and having to come to terms with their current and awful reality of having lost 2 loved ones in such a brutal fashion. The police would later be informed that Nuesca had fled to his parents' home in Urdaneta, Pangasinan. However, about an hour after the shooting, Nuesca had actually surrendered to the police authorities in Rosales, Pangasinan. He turned over his PNP-issued 9mm pistol, which at that point was also the murder weapon. Nuesca was then charged with 2 counts of murder. There was no bail recommendation for the disgraced police officer, and so Nuesca had to remain detained whilst the investigation was ongoing. Now, when this awful news was finally made public through the video going viral and the police updating the public about the next steps in this case, it was not lost on all Filipinos that this killing took place at a time when the country had been seeing so many senseless killings, not only by career criminals but by police officers as well. The backlash against Nuesca and the PNP from netizens, celebrities, and politicians was swift. A lot of people pointed out that Nuesca's power tripping was a result of a culture of rampant impunity and police brutality that were both viewed as being encouraged by the former President Rodrigo Duterte, who was known to essentially incite violence by telling police officers to kill drug offenders, blatantly ignoring thereby the rule of law and due process. Whilst this was and is still very upsetting in and of itself, this perceived culture of impunity, better known colloquially as kill, kill, kill culture in the Philippines, has also been viewed as somehow disproportionately affecting the poorest in Filipino society, as rich and influential drug offenders more or less get away unscathed by the judicial system. Having these issues highlighted and magnified through the Gregorio case put a lot of pressure on the powers that be to have a good response, not only public relations-wise, but also through solid and obvious actions. With that in mind, it was understandable that as more and more details about the case came out, the distrust in the PNP was very palpable. There was a belief that the PNP would choose to whitewash this horrific crime instead of actually investigating it. Filipinos knew that it would not be the first time the PNP chose to protect its own instead of actually following their mandate as civil servants. In any case, the PNP bigwigs promised that whitewashing did not have a place in the agency in general, but also not in this case specifically. We have heard this or some derivative of such a promise before, and rightfully so, Filipinos remained skeptical and observed the next steps in this case instead. Then presidential spokesperson Harry Roque also chimed in, saying that then President Duterte condemned the killings and would not protect Nuesca despite his profession, strongly stating that, quote, the policeman will be punished, and then, quote, the president will not protect him, end of quotes. Interesting way of making such a statement, but not a surprising one altogether, since Duterte had publicly vowed to exonerate police officers who killed in the course of his war on drugs. Now, in an effort perhaps to appease the public or silence the critics, then Justice Secretary Menardo Guevara announced that there was probable cause to finally indict Nuesca and that criminal information was filed less than 24 hours after the crime took place. This was uncharacteristically speedy for the Justice Department and the PNP. But then again, everyone was watching. The PNP then announced that Nuesca would be undergoing a neuropsychiatric assessment at Camp Crame, the PNP main headquarters in the nation's capital. We would also learn from the police chief in Tarlac that Nuesca had apparently disclosed to investigators that this whole incident started when he saw his daughter arguing with the Gregorios. This would affirm what I said earlier when I was talking about the timeline of the incident. According to him, his vision darkened and he supposedly could not control himself anymore. Obviously, this was rather convenient and was somehow, either on purpose or not, preparing the way for maybe an insanity or diminished responsibility defense or whatever its equivalent is in the Philippines. He also supposedly apologized to the Gregorio family, but the family found it hard to even consider accepting this apology, and understandably so. Later, the family would say that they had forgiven him eventually, but insisted that justice still needed to be served. Now, remember earlier when I briefly mentioned that the Gregorios and the Nuescas had a land-related dispute, something about a right-of-way? Well, on the 22nd of December, we learned a little bit more about this dispute. In a radio interview with DZMM, Sonya's husband Florentino explained that Nuesca and his wife had a disagreement over a piece of land. According to him, there were delays in getting a title for a piece of land that Sonya had offered and sold to Nuesca. Sonya, for this reason, returned Nuesca's money, but Nuesca then decided to file an estafa case, which he then eventually lost. To those not familiar, estafa is, according to one website, a quote, legal term for the criminal offense of swindling. It is when someone represents themselves as someone else or as someone who says they can do things they cannot, with such fraud resulting in victim suffering damages, end of quote. From this radio interview, it would seem that some reports may have been wrong about the right-of-way issue, but at this point, that aspect was moot. The more important observation that can be made here is that Nuesca had a chip on his shoulder, and the altercation on the 20th of December 2020 could very well have been his opportunity to finally get some sense of justice for himself after what he thought was a wrong done unto him by Sonya Gregorio. All speculation, of course, but also perhaps eerily plausible. Now, with more and more information coming out about the case, the rattled way with which the authorities involved were trying to damage control continued quite diligently. The PNP, for example, promised to solve the crime within 30 days, also promising that if found guilty, Nuesca would be stripped of his badge, that he would be disqualified from duty, and that he would lose his income and pension. Chief Sinas of the National Police attended the Gregorio's wake after announcing earlier, bizarrely enough, that the Gregorio killings were actually an isolated case. A similar statement was made by then Interior Secretary Eduardo Año, and I think we have collectively rolled our eyes after hearing this because we know for a fact that this was very far away from being an isolated crime. And this is perhaps a good segue into briefly talking about police brutality in the Philippines in more certain terms. The Philippine National Police, as the country's primary law enforcement agency in the Philippines, was established by legislation and empowered by it as well. It is allowed to use force in making arrests and during the investigation and prevention of crime. Under the law, the PNP must generally issue a verbal warning first before it can use force against an offender. Most importantly, police officers are only allowed to use force as would be necessary and reasonable to overcome resistance put up by the offender or to subdue an offender who is posing a clear and imminent danger, or in self-defense of themselves as police officers or others. To ensure that the police do not cross these lines, it is theoretically subject to the oversight of the National Police Commission and 4 other types of direct police oversight mechanisms through the following. Firstly, the CHR, or the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. Secondly, the Presidential Anti-Graft Commission. Then the National Ombudsman Program. And lastly, the so-called PLEB, or People's Law Enforcement Board. And I said theoretically because we do not really see these at work, or at least not effectively. By 2018, for example, even the ICC conducted a preliminary examination into the use of force by the police in the Philippines, which in this case amounted to crimes against humanity as per international law standards. The question then becomes, where were these oversight mechanisms? In August 2018, activists and families of 8 victims of then-President Duterte's so-called war on drugs filed a further complaint with the ICC, alleging the former president of murder as a crime against humanity. This case was then put on hold as the ICC was in the middle of changing its prosecutor. After Fatou Bensouda left, however, new prosecutor Karim Ahmad Khan promised to continue the ICC's work with regards to the Philippines, as in to hold those deemed responsible for the proliferation of police brutality and extrajudicial killings in the Philippines in the past 6 years, a point of great contention among those who supported the past president during and after his term. But why would they support him still, or why would they not condemn police brutality, especially in the Gregorio case? We could debate all day about how social media and disinformation could be the reasons, but here's the thing. The powers that be, as in the PNP and the presidential palace back then, did not even recognize or acknowledge the Gregorio killing as part of a bigger police brutality problem. The PR line was, this was an isolated event, and the supporters of the war on drugs agreed. Obviously, it is clear to both me and you that the Gregorio case is far from an isolated event. If it were, the ICC would not get involved. Winston Ragos, Chay Lemita Evangelista, Ariel Evangelista, Abner Damas Esto y Mendoza, Edward Damas Esto y Mendoza, Mark Lee Pacasno, Esteban Steve Mendoza, Dandy Miguel, Kian de los Santos, Carl Arnaiz, Lilibeth Valdez, Jenner Rondina, Edwin Arnigo. These are just 13 of thousands or tens of thousands who were found to have died at the hand of the police or were allegedly killed by them in the past 6 years. As one social media user said on Twitter, do not call it an isolated case. It's the logical conclusion of a culture of impunity and unchecked abuse. And he's completely right. To say that the Gregorio case was an isolated case sounds very much like gaslighting a whole country who sees police violence every day. Amnesty International, who conducted a thorough study into police brutality in the Philippines, were able to talk to at least one police officer on condition of anonymity, and the revelations are telling. A senior officer, according to Amnesty, revealed that police officers were paid per encounter, and by encounter, he meant extrajudicial killings. Here is a quote from the report, presumably translated from Filipino already. Quote, "We always get paid by the encounter. The amount ranges from 8,000 pesos to 15,000 pesos. The amount is per head. So, if the operation is against 4 people, that's 32,000 pesos. We're paid in cash, secretly, by headquarters. There's no incentive for arresting. We're not paid anything." End of quote. Now, you might think or say, Christine, fair enough, I get what you're saying, but the Gregorio case is quite different. Nuesca was not working. He was off duty and not working as part of some raid or drug bust or any kind of sanctioned operation. And I would say to you, yeah, you're right. But here's the thing. Former President Duterte encouraged police officers to carry their guns even when they are off duty and being civilians. If you zoom out, you will see that the payment for so-called encounters, the violence of police officers during raids like in the Kian de los Santos case, and the non-police vigilantes acting as if they are following some sort of higher calling by Duterte are all part of this bigger culture of impunity. A culture where Duterte said police have license to kill, to pack the funeral parlors, or the promise that we would see the fattening of the fishes in the Manila Bay, as this Duterte promise would be filled with the dead bodies of the enemies of his war on drugs. It is all part of that culture that was established when the former president exonerated police officers involved in drug raid killings by saying they merely shot back when fired upon. It is part of that culture that Duterte nurtured when he said that he would pardon any officer found guilty of murder while carrying out a war on drugs crackdown. It is all part of that big problem, that culture. Ultimately, Nuesca, like many other officers, was emboldened, and that is why he had his gun on him on his off-duty days. That is why he did not hesitate a bit when he pulled the trigger. That is why he was able to walk away like what he did was nothing, or at least as if he thought he'd be protected and did not have to take accountability. I truly believe that were it not for the viral video and the public outcry, we would not have seen any action against Nuesca following the shooting. And because of that video, we saw action. Nuesca was promptly arrested, charged, and detained. The police convinced the minors or teenagers who witnessed the killing to come forward as the prosecution's witnesses. Bigwigs in the government had publicly condemned the shooting, but as we all know, that probably does not carry a lot of weight because unless the perpetrator is actually in jail after a conviction and sentencing, anything can happen in the Philippine judicial system. All eyes were therefore on the PNP and the Justice Department, and I think for the sake of showing strength and proving the critics wrong, they made sure to move this case along quickly amidst the huge social media and traditional media fallout after the shooting. Understandably, the country was still reeling from having seen the viral video of the Gregorio killing. Hashtags like Stop the Killings PH or Police ang Terorista were trending on Twitter and elsewhere on social media, not only locally, but also amongst the diaspora all over the world. When such a social media fallout first emerges, it can feel incredibly empowering if you agree with the viral sentiment or the trending hashtag. You feel validated in your beliefs and opinions. However, just like a lot of things on the internet, things can get out of hand, and it did get out of hand in this case. Instead of keeping civil conversations going and perhaps holding public officials responsible, some internet users resorted to verbally abusing Nuesca's daughter Alicia by passing around her personal information and photos. She was only 12 years old at that time, and whether she rubbed the people the wrong way or not through her actions in the video, no one had the right to vilify and attack a minor who should not be held responsible for the actions of her father. But the internet is a weird and dangerous place, and things like this happen way too often. On the other side of this coin, there were also people who bizarrely enough saw the shooting as justified. A certain police captain named Ariel Boraga from Catanduanes was one of these people. For his opinion on the killings, he had to then pay dearly. He was relieved from duty soon after his social media post went viral as well. It was a stressful few days for a lot of people. But beyond the internet chaos, it was even more disturbing to learn more about Nuesca. As it turned out, he may have always had a violent streak, and it remains a mystery to me that he was able to remain a police officer despite this. According to reports, in the last decade, Nuesca faced 6 cases of grave misconduct, serious neglect of duty, refusal to undergo a drug test, an administrative case, and suspension. There were 2 homicide cases in 2019 in which he was involved as well, but both cases were dismissed for lack of evidence. This surely paints a grim picture of the disgraced policeman. But in all the media and social media uproar about this case, and with all the details coming out about Nuesca, people easily forgot about the 2 families at the center of this case. One lost 2 loved ones in a brutal murder, and another family lost their loved one to a double murder charge. Life would never be the same for these 2 families. For the Gregorios, for example, they had to face the hard task of burying their loved ones on the 27th of December. But even after that, they found it hard to rest and fall asleep, according to one report. The family seemed to have suffered some collective trauma from having witnessed the brutal killing of Sonya and Frank. They were therefore referred to the Tarlac Drug Recovery Clinic, but even after receiving initial help and intervention from said clinic, the family found little peace. The trauma sat too deep and obviously needed perhaps specialist care. In a way, the same or almost the same could be said of the Nuesca family, and I was pleasantly surprised to learn that at least in the early days after the crime, the PNP was of the opinion that both families should be receiving some sort of professional assistance because of what they have witnessed. Whether the families had indeed in the end received this assistance, whether one-off or regularly, is another question. I could not find any reference as to this aspect of the case online, but knowing our systems back home in the Philippines, this assistance likely stopped or fizzled out at some point after the killings. About a month after the shootings, Nuesca was arraigned and had to enter a plea, which would then determine if a full-blown trial was needed or not. Nuesca, surprisingly enough, pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of murder. I think he may have wanted to get the case in front of a judge and test the evidence in trial so that he could potentially also test his defense. Now, there's no information that I could find as to the specifics of the trial, which is a shame really, because I'm very anxious to know what defense Nuesca put forward, whether his lawyers put forward any defense at all, or if they just waited for the prosecution to prove their case. After all, it was the prosecution's case to prove, and Nuesca did not have to say anything at all as the defendant. Now, on top of the criminal case, Nuesca was also dealing with administrative cases filed against him. His troubles were surely not ending anytime soon. Now, even though we don't know the specifics of the trial, what we do know is that around 9 months later, in August 2021, after the horrible killings in Paniqui, Tarlac in December 2020, in what seems to be one of the speediest convictions I've ever seen that does not involve any high-profile individuals, Jonel Nuesca was found guilty of the murders of Sonya and Frank Gregorio and was given 2 life sentences. He was also ordered to pay a total of 952,560 pesos to the heirs of Sonya and Frank Gregorio. And the case could have rested with that, but this story was not done just yet.
Philippine authorities confirmed the death of a jailed former policeman who had been convicted for killing a woman and her son last December. Janelle Nuesca reportedly died on November 30th, but the Bureau of Corrections only reported it on Wednesday. It did not specify the cause of his death. The surviving son of the victim, however, wants confirmation that Nuesca is in fact dead.
Bureau of Corrections spokesperson Gabriel Chacla confirmed on the 1st of December 2021 that Janelle Nuesca had died in the prison's hospital at 6:44 in the evening on Tuesday, the 30th of November. It was reported that he was unconscious when he was brought to the hospital by his cellmates after he collapsed walking outside his prison dormitory. At the time of this reporting, no cause of death was disclosed. However, prison authorities promised to conduct an autopsy and probe for any indication of possible foul play. As you may or may not know, the New Bilibid prison has long since been plagued by controversies and conspiracy theories because of numerous mysterious deaths that had taken place inside it. The case of drug lord J.B. Sebastian may come to mind. In recent days, we've also witnessed reports of the discovery of a tunnel, a secret tunnel, that leads from the prison premises into a muddy part of a wooded area, reviving yet again conspiracy theories and sparking new rumors about what the tunnel's purpose is. In any case, Nuesca's death raised suspicions, and according to a lot of people, his cause of death, once known, could help clarify what had happened to him, bearing in mind that even an autopsy and its results could be manipulated if willed so by powerful people. And so, in order to probe Nuesca's death, the NBI got involved. Around a week after Nuesca's death and nearly a year after the Gregorio double murder, then Justice Secretary Menardo Guevara publicly stated that initial inquiries into Nuesca's death showed that he died of a heart attack. Lab results and results from his pathological exam were still pending at that point, but as per the Justice Secretary, it was definitely a cardiac arrest. Both the Justice Department and the NBI dismissed any rumors of foul play, as Nuesca had supposedly died of natural causes. The autopsy did not show any indications, according to them, that Nuesca was tortured or had suffered any type of violence. So, where does this leave us? Well, back to where we were before the shooting. Nothing has really changed. Back in 2020, then presidential spokesperson Harry Roque, joining in the damage control drama after the killings and in pushing forward the sentiment that the Gregorio double murder was an isolated case, already preemptively announced that there was no need for policy change. He said, quote, "Guns are for the protection of the police. They can't use that for personal vendettas. Policy cannot be formulated on the basis of aberrations." End of quote. This feels willfully obtuse or short-sighted, perhaps both. Roque, for obvious reasons, did not want to recognize or acknowledge the many deaths perpetrated by police officers over the years. A case like the Gregorios is hardly isolated, as I've already said before. Neither is it an aberration when thousands have died and many more thousands of family members are affected by such a big loss. It is intentionally ignoring a huge systemic problem that needs a systemic change and overhaul. It is reaffirming that culture of impunity that I have already discussed. This PR line of the double murder being an isolated case is in a way encouraging police officers with already violent streaks or short tempers that, hey, you're good as long as your actions are not caught on video and your actions do not go viral. I say this again because it seems that all the other cases that remain obscure, videoless, and not on our radar have been swept under the rug. We do not know of them. Most of them we will never get to hear about. We will never know the names of the murdered ones, and we still do not know if the police officers in those cases have been prosecuted or not, or will be prosecuted or not. For this reason, I echo what a former partner of mine once said about the digital age and police brutality. Whenever possible and whenever it is safe for us to do so, it is now upon us to hold police authorities accountable directly by pointing the cameras at them and hitting that record button. The more we manage to record the reality of police brutality, the more we force their hand, because at the end of the day, the change will not come from the top. It will be from the bottom up. Lagim fam, thank you so much for listening to episode 2 of this podcast. This case has been requested so many times that I could not ignore it anymore. I hope it was interesting for you. As always, thank you for the support. Thanks to my Patreon subscribers, to those who donate to my buymecoffee.com account, to those who regularly comment and share my content. This is the kind of support that an independent podcast really needs. Please never stop doing what you're already doing. Make sure that you follow me on social media as well, and that you rate and review my podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps me with being discovered by new listeners. Again, Lagim fam, thank you so much. Until next time, maraming salamat at mabuhay.